They called it a terrible mistake. After the divorce, alone and 7 months pregnant, she spent her last savings on an abandoned crime boss's estate that no one else dared to touch. The place was crumbling. The history was dark. But what she discovered inside that forgotten mansion wasn't decay or danger. It was a secret buried for 70 years. One that would shatter everything she thought she knew about her family and completely transform her future. Before we begin, please subscribe for more powerful stories of women who refuse to stay broken. And tell us in the comments where you are watching from. We like to know how far our stories travel. Sarah Brennan hadn't felt brave in years. Not when her husband left her for a yoga instructor half her age. Not when the bank foreclosed on their suburban dream home. And certainly not when, at 41 and heavily pregnant, she used the last of her divorce settlement to buy a decaying mansion everyone else called cursed. But standing at the iron gates of the Castellano estate on the edge of the Catskill Mountains, Sarah felt something that defied all logic, a calling. The mansion loomed like a Gothic monument to a forgotten era. Built in the 1920s by Vincent the Viper Castellano, a bootlegger who'd controlled half the Northeast during Prohibition. Local legends spoke of hidden tunnels, bodies buried in the foundation, and a fortune that vanished the night Vincent died in a police shootout. For 7 decades, no one had lived there. Sarah did what everyone said was insane. She found the listing on a county tax auction website, bought it sight unseen for $23,000, every penny she had left. Her lawyer thought she'd lost her mind. Her sister stopped returning her calls. But when your entire life has already collapsed behind you, walking into a haunted house feels strangely like coming home. She gripped the heavy brass key and pushed through the warped front doors. Dust particles danced in the gray afternoon light filtering through broken windows. Sarah whispered to the daughter growing inside her, "This place has been waiting just like us. Let's find out why." She didn't come looking for ghosts, but the house had been expecting her. The first night was colder than any winter Sarah remembered. The ancient radiators groaned and rattled but produced no heat. She built a fire in the massive stone fireplace using newspapers and split logs she'd bought at a gas station. The flames crackled with more sound than warmth, but it was something. She sat on a dusty Persian rug, hands wrapped around a thermos of tea, her swollen belly pressing against her flannel shirt. The air smelled of mold, cedar, and something faintly sweet, like old cigars or expensive bourbon left to evaporate in crystal decanters. That's when she heard it. A distinct thud from somewhere on the second floor, not the settling groan of old wood, not wind rattling loose shutters. A deliberate, heavy sound, like furniture being dragged across bare floorboards. Sarah froze, every muscle tensing. Her baby kicked, as if responding to her surge of adrenaline. "Probably raccoons," she muttered, "or a possum, or the ghost of some bootlegger with terrible timing." She climbed the grand staircase, each step creaking in protest. Her phone's flashlight barely penetrated the thick darkness. At the top, a long hallway stretched toward the east wing, where Victorian wallpaper peeled from the walls in long, curling strips. The door at the end stood slightly open. She pushed it slowly. Inside was a bedroom frozen in time, a 4-poster bed with moth-eaten velvet curtains, an ornate vanity thick with dust, a wingback chair sagging near a cold fireplace. But what caught her attention was the massive wardrobe against the far wall. One of its doors hung open. Inside, a sheet had been pulled down, revealing empty hangers swaying slightly, as if someone had just searched through them. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "There's no one else here," she said aloud, but her voice trembled with doubt. She checked the room thoroughly, opened the window locked from inside, checked the closet empty except for cobwebs. No animals, no squatters, no rational explanation. She left the door open behind her and returned downstairs to double-check every lock. She sat by the dying fire until the embers turned to ash, unable to sleep. Morning brought courage and curiosity in equal measure. Sarah spent the day exploring systematically, room by room. She opened shutters, swept away cobwebs, let decades of trapped sunlight flood back into forgotten spaces. The mansion was larger than she'd realized. 3 full floors, an attic, a wine cellar, and a greenhouse that had collapsed into a tangle of broken glass and wild vines. It was beautiful in the way abandoned things are, silent, stubborn, refusing to disappear. In the library, she found an old Victrola record player. In the dining room, a table set for 12 with china still in place, as if waiting for guests who never arrived. Behind a dresser in the master suite, she discovered a photograph. A man in a pinstripe suit, cigarette dangling from his lips, eyes hard and calculating. On the back, someone had written in fading ink, "Vincent, 1931," before everything fell apart. That night, Sarah returned to the East Wing bedroom, determined to understand what she'd heard. Nothing moved, nothing made sound, but as she turned to leave, she noticed something odd. On the wall beside the wardrobe, barely visible beneath layers of paint and wallpaper, was a rectangular outline, a hidden seam, like a door someone had tried to erase from existence. Sarah pressed her palm against it, solid, but she felt the faintest whisper of cool air seeping through a crack. Her heart raced with possibility. She hurried downstairs to the kitchen and returned with a butter knife, carefully peeling away the wallpaper along the seam. Beneath, she found aged wood paneling and a small, rusted keyhole shaped like a blooming flower. "Where's the key?" she whispered to the darkness. Sleep was impossible that night. Something in her bones told her that door, whatever lay behind it, was connected to why she was here. 3 days later, while clearing out the study, Sarah found it. Hidden inside a hollowed-out copy of The Great Gatsby on a high shelf, an ornate brass key shaped like a lily, tarnished green with age. She didn't hesitate. Back in the East Wing, she slid the key into the lock. It resisted for a moment, then turned with a satisfying click. The hidden door swung inward with a long, aching groan of protest. Behind it, a narrow staircase spiraled down into absolute darkness. Sarah stood at the threshold, one hand on her belly, the other holding her phone like a talisman. The air rising from below was noticeably cooler, thicker, like stepping into a cave. She descended slowly, testing each step before trusting it with her weight. At the bottom, she found a room untouched since the 1930s, dark wood paneling, a round poker table with cards still scattered across its surface. Empty bottles of expensive whiskey lined a mahogany bar, leather chairs cracked with age, and on the far wall, a massive iron safe, its dial worn smooth from decades of use. Beside it, a filing cabinet had toppled over, papers spilled across the floor in chaotic piles. Sarah knelt carefully, gathering them with trembling hands. Blueprints, financial ledgers filled with coded entries, maps of railway routes, lists of names and dates, and at the top of the pile, a file folder labeled in neat typewriter font, "Brennan, Confidential." Her blood turned to ice. Her name, her family name, in a bootlegger's secret room. And just like that, Sarah realized she hadn't stumbled onto a forgotten property by accident. She'd been drawn here by a history she never knew existed, a truth someone had buried 70 years ago, a truth about her. The folder marked Brennan, Confidential, trembled in Sarah's hands. She sank into a cracked leather chair beside the poker table, the weight of discovery pressing down like gravity. She opened the folder slowly. Inside were yellowed documents, fragile as dried leaves. Birth certificates, photographs, letters typed on brittle stationery with faded carbon ink. The first page made her world tilt. Subject, Dorothy Brennan. Alias, Dorothy Castellano. Sarah blinked hard, trying to make the words rearrange themselves into something that made sense. Her grandmother's name had been Dorothy Brennan. She'd been told Dorothy was an Irish immigrant who worked as a seamstress in Manhattan and died before Sarah was born. But this report told a different story. According to the FBI file, and it was definitely an FBI file, complete with official stamps and case numbers, Dorothy Castellano had been the wife of Vincent, the Viper, Castellano. She disappeared from federal surveillance in 1942 after a raid on one of Vincent's warehouses. No body was recovered. She was presumed dead. The final page was a photograph, grainy and creased. A young woman holding an infant. She wore a string of pearls and an expression of barely contained terror. The baby's birth date matched Sarah's father's birthday exactly. Sarah stared at the image. That was her grandmother. And the baby was her father, who'd grown up believing his mother was a simple seamstress who'd fled poverty in Ireland. Everything was a lie. The next morning, Sarah drove into the nearest town, a place called Millbrook, population 1,847. It had one diner, one general store, one library that doubled as the Historical Society, and a post office run by a man who looked like he'd witnessed the Civil War personally. Sarah took the photograph to the Historical Society. A silver-haired woman sat at the front desk reading a paperback mystery. "Excuse me," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I just bought the Castellano estate. I found this photograph. I think it's from the 1940s. The woman, whose name tag read Ruth, adjusted her reading glasses and peered at the image. Her mouth twitched. "Well, I'll be damned," Ruth whispered. "That's Dorothy Castellano. She vanished after the feds raided Vincent's operation. Nobody ever found her." She tapped the photograph. "And that baby, folks said she was pregnant when she disappeared. No one ever saw the child. Most assumed they both died." Sarah tried to steady her voice. "Do you know if she had any living relatives?" "Not that anyone's aware of. The Castellano name died with Vincent, or so everyone thought." Ruth looked at Sarah more carefully now. "You said you bought the estate." "Yes, at a tax auction." Ruth studied her face with new intensity. "You've got her eyes, same shape, same color." Sarah drove back to the mansion in silence, hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. Her daughter kicked gently, as if sensing the storm of emotions swirling through her mother's body. She wasn't just connected to this house by chance or coincidence. She was descended from it, from them. Her grandmother hadn't been a simple seamstress fleeing poverty. She'd been married to one of the most dangerous criminals in the Northeast. She'd run, changed her name, tried to raise a child in peace and anonymity. Sarah's entire family history was built on lies. And then her phone rang. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Ms. Brennan," a smooth male voice, cultured and cold. "You've uncovered something that was never meant to see daylight." Sarah's heart hammered. "Who is this?" "You don't need my name. Just understand this. Walk away from that house. Forget the files. Forget the safe before this becomes dangerous." "Is that a threat?" "It's a courtesy," the voice replied. "Next time we won't call first." The line went dead. That night Sarah didn't sleep. She sat in the library with the folder in her lap, a fire poker across her knees, every window and door locked. Someone knew what she'd found. And if they knew, it meant what she'd discovered was real, valuable, dangerous. She reread the documents by lamplight. Vincent Castellano hadn't just been a bootlegger. He'd built an empire, warehouses, shipping routes, political connections. According to the ledgers, he'd hidden millions in today's value, smuggled out of New York during the Prohibition crackdown and secreted away before his death. The safe in the basement wasn't just for poker chips and whiskey. It was a vault, and somewhere in these files were the codes, the maps, the keys to finding it. At 2 a.m., headlights cut through the darkness outside. A black Mercedes pulled up just beyond the gate and stopped. Sarah's pulse spiked. She crouched behind the curtains, watching. Two men in dark suits stepped out. They didn't knock. They circled the property slowly, testing doors, peering through windows. One of them tried the side entrance, locked. They waited for 10 minutes, then left, but not before sliding a white envelope under the gate. Sarah waited until dawn before retrieving it, barefoot on the frost-covered gravel. Inside was a typed note, "Leave now. This property does not belong to you." And beneath it, a photograph of Sarah herself, standing in the hidden room holding the Brennan file, taken through the basement window. Sarah's hands shook. She wasn't safe. Not yet. But she couldn't leave either. because what she held wasn't just money or secrets. It was truth. It was family. It was her daughter's inheritance. They wanted her gone because they were afraid of what she'd reveal, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. Sarah Brennan had already lost everything once. She had nothing left to fear, and that made her more dangerous than any ghost haunting these walls. Sarah stood in the kitchen the next morning, staring out at the long gravel driveway. The black Mercedes was gone, but its presence lingered like smoke. She hadn't slept. Her mind replayed the phone call, the photograph, the threat disguised as a warning. You've uncovered something that was never meant to see daylight, but it was too late. The light had already found it. She looked down at her belly. Her daughter shifted inside her, a gentle reminder of what was at stake. "You're going to know where you come from," Sarah whispered. "All of it, the truth." She made a decision then. No more hiding. No more fear. She would understand everything in those files, every ledger entry, every coded message, every name. She started methodically, spreading documents across the study's massive oak desk. Vincent Castellano had been meticulous, paranoid, brilliant. He'd laundered money through shell companies, hidden cash in false walls, buried gold beneath floorboards. He'd even created fake identities for his family in case everything collapsed, which it had. But one entry stood out, written hastily in the margin of a smaller ledger. "If they come for me, Dorothy knows where it ends. The river remembers everything." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Dorothy. Her grandmother. She hadn't just run. She'd carried the final piece of Vincent's puzzle with her. And if that knowledge hadn't died with her, maybe it had been passed down somehow. That afternoon, Sarah drove to the Millbrook River, which wound through a dense forest east of town. She didn't know exactly what she was looking for, just that she had to look. She parked near an old stone bridge and started walking along the muddy riverbank. At first, nothing seemed unusual, but then, about a mile downstream, she saw it. Carved into the trunk of an ancient oak tree, a lily, nearly identical to the shape of the key she'd found. Sarah's breath caught. She followed the curve of the river and discovered a cairn of stones, arranged too precisely to be natural. Her hands trembled as she brushed away leaves and dirt. Beneath was a metal hatch sealed with a heavy padlock. She fit the lily-shaped key into the lock. It turned with a rusty groan. The hatch opened, releasing a hiss of trapped air. Inside, a narrow ladder descended into darkness. Sarah climbed down carefully, her pregnant belly making each movement awkward. What she found wasn't gold. Not yet. It was a room, underground, dry, lined with metal shelves stacked with waterproof file boxes, dozens of them, stamped with the insignia Castellano Holdings, private, financial records, land deeds, photographs of men in smoky rooms shaking hands over illegal deals. Evidence of bribery, blackmail, political corruption, everything. And in the back, a large steamer trunk. Sarah opened it with shaking hands. Inside, cash wrapped in oilcloth, stacks of bearer bonds, gold coins that gleamed even in the dim light of her phone's flashlight. And tucked in a velvet box, a string of pearls. She knew those pearls. She'd seen them in the photograph of her grandmother. Sarah closed the trunk slowly. This wasn't just treasure, it was leverage, power, the ability to rewrite history. That night back at the mansion, Sarah sat in the library with the pearls in her hands. She understood now. This house wasn't haunted by ghosts. It was haunted by truth, by what powerful men had tried to bury, by what strong women had protected at terrible cost. All this time she'd thought she was running from her past, from her failed marriage, from loneliness, from shame. But she'd actually been running toward something, toward who she really was. Not just a discarded wife, not just a woman who made a desperate gamble on a cursed house. She was a descendant of survivors, of fighters, of women who refused to disappear quietly. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She stood slowly, gripping the fire poker again. But when she opened the door, she found an elderly man in a gray wool coat, hat pulled low over sharp eyes. "You must be Sarah," he said. She nodded warily. "I was a friend of your grandfather's." Or maybe an enemy who respected him. Depends how you look at it. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather journal. Vincent said someday someone would come back here with the guts to finish what he started. Looks like it's you. Sarah took the journal. Inside were more names, more locations, more passwords, more keys to more secrets. The man tipped his hat and walked back to his car without asking for anything, without explaining further. He just knew. And now Sarah did too. She wasn't here by accident. She wasn't just rebuilding her life. She was reclaiming a legacy. And the real story was only beginning. The morning after the stranger left the leather journal, Sarah sat at the kitchen table in pale dawn light. The mansion, for the first time since she'd arrived, didn't feel oppressive. It felt alive, like it was breathing again after decades of holding its breath. The journal lay open before her, page after page of names, dates, locations. Some belonged to politicians long dead, others to business magnates whose families still held power. A few were disturbingly current, people Sarah recognized from news headlines. At the very end, written in careful block letters, "Don't let them erase us." Sarah understood something then that she hadn't before. This wasn't just about inheritance or secrets or even justice. This was about truth and what you choose to do with it. By noon, she'd driven into town and parked in front of the only law firm in Millbrook that didn't have a partner's name appearing in Vincent's corruption ledgers. Walsh and Associates. She met with Catherine Walsh, a woman in her late 50s with iron gray hair pulled into a severe bun and eyes that missed absolutely nothing. Sarah laid everything on Catherine's desk. The ledgers, the deeds, the photographs, the cash, the bearer bonds, even the black and white photo of Dorothy holding her father as an infant. Catherine listened in silence, then leaned back and exhaled slowly. "Well," she said, "you've got enough here to bring down half the county if you wanted to." "I don't want revenge," Sarah said. "I want to protect what's mine. And maybe do some good with it." Catherine raised an eyebrow. "You sound like your grandfather." "I sound like my grandmother," Sarah corrected. "She's the one who ran, who started over, who tried to break the cycle." Catherine nodded once, a small smile playing at her lips. "Then let's build something new." Over the next month, Sarah got to work. With Catherine's help, she established a private trust, legally securing the Castellano estate and all assets found in the underground vault. She used shell companies, just like Vincent once had, but not for crime, for protection, to shield her legacy from people who would try to take it. The first thing she funded was repairs. She hired local contractors, not big corporate crews, but small operations run by people who needed the work. A single mother with a drywall business, a veteran who could barely get hired anywhere, young carpenters fresh out of trade school. Room by room the mansion transformed, windows replaced, roof repaired, garden restored. The rot pulled out piece by piece, just like Sarah was doing with her own life. One evening, sitting on the newly restored porch swing, belly heavy with her daughter's weight, Sarah watched the sun sink behind the mountains and felt something shift inside her. This wasn't just preservation anymore. It was purpose. A week later, she filed paperwork for a nonprofit organization, the Dorothy Foundation. Mission: to provide housing, resources, and community for women in crisis. Women fleeing abuse, women in the aftermath of divorce, women with nowhere else to go. Because Sarah knew what it felt like to have nothing, to be pregnant and alone and terrified. And now that she had a house with 14 empty bedrooms, she saw no reason they should stay empty. The East Wing was repurposed first. Fresh paint, new beds, working plumbing. She partnered with local shelters and social workers. The first resident arrived within 3 weeks, then a second, then a mother with twin toddlers. They didn't ask about the mansion's dark history. Sarah didn't offer it. All they needed to know was this: you are safe here. You are not alone. You have a future. One morning, as Sarah made tea in the renovated kitchen, a young woman named Jessica, 6 months pregnant and fresh out of a violent marriage, stood in the doorway. "You own this whole place?" Jessica asked, disbelief coloring her voice. Sarah smiled. It owns me just as much." Jessica looked around at the high ceilings, the morning light streaming through lace curtains, the polished wood floors. "It doesn't feel like a shelter." "It's not," Sarah said. "It's home. For all of us." That night, Sarah sat in the hidden study beneath the house, the journals and files carefully stored in locked cabinets. She added a new file of her own. Photographs of the renovations. Names of the women who now lived there. Letters of gratitude, some barely literate but deeply felt. She slipped a handwritten note at the front. "This is how we break the cycle, not with threats, with sanctuary." She looked down at her belly and smiled. "You're going to be born in a house full of strong women, just like the ones who came before you." Outside, wind moved through the trees. Inside, there was warmth. Laughter drifted from the common room. The smell of dinner cooking filled the air. The ghosts hadn't left. They were just watching now. And finally, they were proud. Sarah Brennan stood in front of the mirror, in what used to be the grand ballroom of the Castellano estate. The chandelier above her head, once caked in grime and cobwebs, now sparkled with new crystal replacements. Her reflection was different now. Not because she'd changed her hair or lost the baby weight, but because for the first time in years she recognized the woman staring back. Her eyes weren't tired anymore. They were determined. Her shoulders weren't hunched with shame. They were squared with purpose. She wasn't the abandoned wife who signed divorce papers in a lawyer's office. She wasn't the woman who cried in cheap motels while holding an ultrasound photo. She was something entirely new, founder of a sanctuary, protector of a legacy, and very soon a mother. By the 4th month of the house's transformation, the community noticed. The townspeople who once whispered about that crazy pregnant woman in the murder house now brought donations. Blankets, casseroles, baby clothes. The contractor left extra materials free of charge. A retired teacher offered to run literacy classes in the library. The local priest asked if he could hold services in the ballroom. One afternoon, an elderly woman knocked on the door holding a faded photograph. Her voice trembled when she spoke. "This was my mother. She worked here in the 30s, housemaid to the Castellanos. She said Vincent was ruthless, but Dorothy, she was kind. Said the house was always full of secrets, but also full of life." Sarah took the photograph with reverence, adding it to the growing archive of the estate's true history. The house was beginning to speak again. Through memories, through people, through healing. But growth is never just peaceful. It's painful, like stretching muscles you forgot you had. Sarah still woke at 3 in the morning with doubts pressing down on her chest. Am I strong enough? Am I doing the right thing? She wrestled with that nightly. She read through more of Vincent's journals, torn between pride and discomfort. His world had been brutal, ruthless, built on violence and exploitation. But beneath the blood and corruption was a man desperately trying to protect his family from forces closing in. Now Sarah was doing the same. Only instead of guns and bribes, she used paperwork and compassion. Instead of hiding money in vaults, she used it to fund prenatal care, legal assistance, job training. What Vincent had buried underground, Sarah was lifting into the light. Then came the day the first woman left. Jessica, the one who'd stood in the kitchen asking if the place was real, had gotten a job at the county clerk's office. She'd found a small apartment nearby. She came back with flowers for Sarah. "I never thought I could start again," Jessica said, voice breaking. "You gave me that." Sarah hugged her tightly, unable to speak. Later that evening, Sarah wrote in her own journal, "They think I gave them something. The truth is, they saved me just as much." Her contractions started 2 weeks before her due date. It was the middle of the night. Thunder rolled through the mountains. Rain hammered against the windows. Sarah tried not to panic. She texted Catherine Walsh and one of the volunteer nurses staying at the house. Within minutes, the mansion came alive. Mrs. Acaffer, a retired midwife who'd taken a room on the 2nd floor, was by her side almost instantly, calm as still water. "You're in good hands," she said, laying warm towels on the bed. "This house was built for storms." Sarah gripped the edge of the mattress and laughed through the pain. "My whole life has been a storm. Mrs. Okafor smiled gently. Yes, but look at you. You didn't drown. After 9 hours of labor, just as the first light began to push through the curtains, a cry filled the room. Clear, strong, alive. They placed the baby in Sarah's arms, wrapped in a quilt stitched from donated fabric scraps by the women of the house. She was small but perfect. Dark hair, Dorothy's nose, Vincent's determined chin. Sarah stared at her and whispered, "Welcome home, Dorothy Rose Brennan." That night, as the baby slept curled against her chest, Sarah sat in the old rocking chair by the window and looked out at the estate grounds. Moonlight shimmered over the trees. Wind whispered through the walls. There were still rooms she hadn't explored, still secrets left untouched, but that was okay, because now she knew who she was. Not the girl her husband abandoned, not the woman who bought a broken house on a broken heart, the mother, the heir, the builder of something that would outlive her. And the house no longer felt haunted. It felt sacred. 6 months later, the Castellano estate didn't look like a crime lord's mansion anymore. The paint was fresh. The porch swing no longer creaked ominously. It laughed with the sounds of toddlers learning to walk. The east wing glowed warmly each evening, filled with women learning how to begin again. In the west wing, Sarah sat in the rebuilt study with Dorothy sleeping in a bassinet beside her, swaddled in the same blanket her great-grandmother had hand-stitched during her own years in hiding. Outside, wind stirred the oak trees. They no longer whispered secrets. Now they told stories of women who refused to be erased. Sarah looked around the study. Where ledgers once listed bootleg runs and bribes, the shelves now held framed photographs. Moments of joy, moments of survival. Jessica smiling beside her apartment key. Amanda hugging her daughter after winning custody. A letter from a woman named Claire. "You made me believe I deserved to come home again." Sarah kept every letter. Because that's the part no one tells you. Legacy isn't found in blood or bank accounts. It's in what you do with the broken pieces. It's in what you choose to rebuild. The townspeople no longer looked at Sarah with suspicion. They waved when she walked to the market, stopped her for advice, invited her to town council meetings. They even started calling the estate by a new name, the Brennan House. At first, Sarah corrected them. "It's the Castellano estate," she'd say. But then one of the women, young, brave, 8 months pregnant, smiled and said, "It was, now it's yours." Sarah realized something then. She hadn't just inherited a house or a mystery. She had inherited a mission, and she had fulfilled it. One morning, Dorothy, now 6 months old, with eyes full of curiosity and a laugh that bubbled like champagne, reached up and pulled Sarah's journal from her lap. It fell open to the first page. Sarah picked it up and smiled. It read, "Day 1. I don't know who I am anymore." She turned to the last page and added, "Day 197. I know exactly who I am now. I am my grandmother's courage. I am my daughter's future. I am the storm and the calm that follows it." Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the mountains, Sarah walked out to the garden with Dorothy cradled in a sling against her chest. The stone path, once choked with weeds, now bloomed with wildflowers planted by the women themselves. Each bed bore a small plaque, not with names of the past but names of survivors, women who had stayed, women who had begun again. Sarah paused by the final bed, still unplanted. She knelt carefully, set Dorothy on a soft blanket nearby, and dug a small hole with her hands. Into it she placed the lily-shaped key, the one that had opened the first hidden door, the one that had started everything. She covered it with soil, pressed it down, and whispered, "Thank you." Not just to the house, not just to Vincent or Dorothy or even her younger self, but to the journey. To the silence that taught her strength, to the darkness that made her seek light, to the loneliness that carved space for community. She picked up Dorothy, kissed her soft forehead, and looked toward the horizon. "There will come a day," she whispered, "when you'll ask me what this place is, why it matters. What we're doing here," she smiled. "And I'll tell you, this is where women come to stop running. This is where broken becomes beautiful. This is where silence turns into song." In the end, She didn't need monuments or headlines or history books, because Sarah Brennan had built something no one could tear down. A legacy not carved in stone but rooted in compassion, reborn in healing, alive in every breath her daughter would ever take. And that was everything. Sometimes the greatest turning points in life begin in ruins. Sarah Brennan didn't set out to become anyone's savior. Not her own, not her daughter's, not the women who would fill the halls of that once-forgotten mansion. She simply wanted a place to start over. But in choosing to stay, in refusing to run from what scared her, she stepped into something bigger than herself. In a world that tells women to disappear quietly, Sarah chose to remain visible. And in doing so, she lit the way for others to follow. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel so you will be notified when we post our next story. If you know someone starting over, share this with them. Sometimes all it takes is one key to unlock everything.